Hey, Jackie, we see you there. Mr. France, are you there on the line? You want to give folks a couple more minutes here and then do a roll call at maybe, I don't know, 3:33 and see who we have on the line?
That sounds good to me, Andrew. We'll wait just a minute or two more and see if there's anybody else coming on, and we'll proceed.
All right, sounds good. All right. Do we want to go ahead and try to see who we have on the line? I'll go down the SMAC membership there if that works for you. Do you and you want to go ahead and call us to order first there? Does that work for you, Mr. France?
That does work for me. Yeah, I'd like to call the January 21 SMAC meeting to order. I'd like to thank everybody that has joined, all the SMAC members, public members, and staff. Just over to Andrew now and let him do a roll call. And Andrew, if you want after that, you can jump right on into the business.
Sounds good, all. And I know most people are getting pretty used to these meetings here, but we do have a lot of folks on the phone, and if that ends up being a lot of SMAC members, we may have to leave those lines unmuted. So if you could, please try to do your best to keep those phone lines muted if we do have to leave them open just for discussion there. But with that, we've got Chairman France is here, so I'll mark him here on the roll, and then we'll work down the list here. So let's see, is Mr. Cowart here? Mr. Cowart? Okay. Mr. D. Maria. John D. Maria, are you on one of the lines there? Dan Dice, are
Yes.
you on the line there, Mr. Dice?
Yeah, I'm
Hi,
here.
Dan. Okay, looks like I think we have him as caller 5 there, Jamie. All right. Let's see. Let's see. Ernest George, I don't believe Mr. George, are you there? He was, I think, bringing his boat up to bay today, so I'm not sure he'll be able to make it. Okay. Mr. Richard Green?
I'm here.
All right, good to have you here. I think I see Mr. Hutchins. Are you still there?
Yep, Andrew, I'm here, present and accounted for.
All right. Let's see, Mr. Ben Johnson, are you there still? I think we've got you on there.
Yes, sir. I'm still here.
Okay, loud and clear. I think I just saw Tommy pop up on the screen. Mr. Kellum, are you there?
Present.
All right. Miss Beverly Ludford, are you there? I haven't seen her pop
Here.
up.
I'm
You
present.
are there. Hi, Beverly.
Hi, how are you? Good.
Doing good. Mr. Cody Metcalf, are you there? Mr. Metcalf. Alrighty. Let's see. Mr. Porter, Don Porter. Okay, I think he's planning on calling in, but he might be having some connectivity issues there. And I think I saw Miss Jackie Shannon on the line there. Are you there? Hey, Jackie, if you're talking, you're on mute right now. Hey, Jackie Shannon, are you there? I think if you're trying to say something, you're still showing up as on mute. Okay. Well, we have her showing up. She might be having some audio issues there, so she might be double muted. Sometimes if you do *6, if you're calling in as well, that might let you unmute if you're double muted on the phone and on the computer. Not sure if that's what's going on, but we'll try to get up with her if we can. But okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started if that's all right with you, Mr. Frayne. I think we do
Yes.
have
Please.
All right. So I just wanted to say thank you again for everyone coming here. I guess coming here remotely anyway. I wish I was standing there in front of y'all in the commission room. It's a lot nicer to do these things in person, and I appreciate everyone making the effort to get here virtually anyway. And with that, I'll do my best to try to work through this virtually, and we'll all try to use the patience we've all grown used to using with these online forums, and try to have a productive meeting here. With that, I wanted to go over the agenda. I sent out a revised copy of that. I'll just read what's on there now. But the first item is a discussion of how the transition to online harvest reporting for the oyster fisheries is gone. I then wanted to go over the replenishment restoration activities that we were able to get done last year, just sort of give a brief overview of that. And then get into some discussion on the planned oyster restoration and replenishment for 2021. And I'm really think it would be beneficial to sort of focus that aspect on mostly seed-related issues, and then bring a fully formulated plan back to SMAC for further discussion and hopefully approval at a future meeting. So I wasn't trying to get everything done all in one 2-hour meeting today. I think it's a little bit much for just one meeting. So if everyone's amenable to it, I'd like to try to come back in about 2 weeks, early February to middle February, and try to have a fully formulated plan with input from this meeting included in it, and hear the full plan then. And then talk briefly about James River seed harvest. And then Chairman France reached out, and a number of other folks have brought it up about the oyster ground lease renewal guidelines that'll be heard at this Tuesday's commission meeting. So I wanted to give SMAC an opportunity to discuss those. I don't think there's going to be opportunity to actually change those before they're heard at the commission meeting, but just make sure everyone's aware of what's going on with that. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started on the first agenda item. This will be a brief one there on mandatory harvest online reporting for the oyster fishery. So really, this is just mostly a reminder that there was a regulatory change that went into effect January 1st of this year, requiring all reporting of oyster harvest from both public and private ground and clam harvest from private ground to be reported online only. So the reports from this month, starting February 5th, are going to be the first reports that will only be accepted online. So far, I haven't heard any complaints that have come to the agency on that aspect of it. And I have noticed that it is looking like our harvest reporting for the fall is already more up to date than it would be typically if we were just handling mostly paper reports. But I just wanted to quickly sort of hear from the SMAC members if they've had any issues, have heard any issues from the other harvesters out there on how this transition has been going.
Andrew, this is Wayne. I tell you, I haven't heard a positive or detrimental word about the reporting. I think everybody's kind of accepted it and is ready to go with it.
Now that's really good to hear. I think this really is good just for our own record-keeping purposes and sort of judging how the fishery is doing. And I'm sure many folks have heard about that emergency closure there in the James River. But with the health department issues and any kind of outbreaks or anything at all like that, having accurate reporting really is good to have and up to date and help sort of collectively protect the industry. So I really think this will help with that. But I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but wanted to put this link up there in case folks have any questions and let folks know we tried to make this more prominent on our website there, so it's easy to find and easy to do, and I'm glad it's going smoothly.
JC.
Go ahead there.
Yeah, I haven't had any problems heard anything from any of my members either. As far as I know, it all has been going pretty smooth. So I think I only had one response from a guy who had an aquaculture operation, and that was some time back. But on the public side, everything I think has been going okay.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Are there? I always want to remember to pause for a minute if there's any other comments on that with these online meetings before I move on to the next thing. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to say on that matter? Okay, if it's all right with you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item, just a review of what we did in the 2020 season there.
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
So this is just a brief sort of snapshot of the amount of material that we were able to place on both harvest and sanctuary areas. Most of the shell that you're seeing here went on harvest areas, but in total last year alone, just in 2020, we were able to plant over 800,000 bushels of both seed, house shell, and shell culch is actually some shell that we catch on the seaside there, and that fossil shell there, close to more than 700,000 bushels of that on public ground. So we had a little bit bigger than we typically do program there. We're usually in the 500,000 or 600,000 bushel range, but we were able to get a lot of this shell overboard in a lot of places, and we're able to move a fair amount of seed again last year, and that was a combination of that James River Nansman Ridge seed and some seed that we moved from the Great Wacomico River there. In addition to that, most of that granite that was planted there was sort of done in sanctuary-only areas, and it was separate from the restoration funding. But with some of that shell that went on those sanctuary areas, I know there were some concerns about the level of funding from this group that were expressed that was being spent on sanctuaries versus harvest areas. But we were able, as a result of some of that spending, to get more shell per dollar planted on the harvest areas last year. So I know sort of the principle of that, there were some issues raised, but as a result of sort of the economy of scale we were able to work with last year, more shell went on harvest areas as well. So we were excited to, in spite the COVID pandemic, to get most of the work that we had planned done last year. Had a lot of, it wasn't by me alone by any means. We have a great staff, a small staff that worked really hard this year to get a lot of this work done. So we're glad to be able to do that. And I want to stop here again. This is before I go on to that, if there's any questions on this, and I just wanted to go over what the budget was last year, and just note that the only thing that we didn't incorporate in terms of spending last year was that capital funds, as those weren't cleared to be spent until just recently. And there were a couple other minor adjustments from last year, but this is the funding that we used for last year minus that capital funds, which will stay in the budget for this year. But I'll go back to that last slide there with what we did and pause there if there's any questions on the work that that was able to be done in terms of replenishment restoration last year, before I move on to plans for this year.
Andrew, JC.
Yep, go ahead there.
Yeah, I want to comment a little bit on that. I was one that was concerned about more money being spent on restoration as compared to replenishment, naturally, because I'm representing the watermen, and we're the ones out there working these public oyster grounds. And so I was concerned that, more money was being put on one side more than the other side. So I would like to commend you on and your staff from increasing that and getting more on the replenishment side. And I'd like to see that continue. Like to see it, more on a 50-50 basis. I think both areas are important, but certainly you don't get the results from on the restoration side. You don't see the money that you do on the replenishment side. So glad that we did. We're able to bring that up to speed a little bit better, and hopefully we can continue to see that in the future. Just want to say thanks to everybody for the help.
No, I appreciate those comments there. Is there anything else before I move on? Just want to make sure I give everyone an opportunity there. All right. This was just, again, I touched on that. This was the budget from last year. And if it's all right with you, Chairman France, I'll move on to that, the 2020 plan. And I want to focus most of this on seed and sort of get some good comments there. But if it's all right, I'll move on to the next agenda item there.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So these numbers might be tweaked a little bit, but this is going to be about probably the funding that we'll have this year again. So the general funds for replenishment are going to stay likely going to stay at that $2.5 million mark. The restoration specific general funds at that $1.5 million mark. And then those capital funds that weren't authorized for release last year are likely to be released this year, and those are again going to be focused specifically on restoration areas under the Chesapeake Bay program. So I know we touched under that a little bit, but I wanted to emphasize that wherever and whenever possible, we're going to try to use that economy of scale to our advantage with this funding in as many ways as possible to sort of grow the program for the benefit of both the harvest side and the sanctuary side of things. So we're trying to look at this as a rising tide floating all ships, so to speak, to use old cliche, and try to get the most out of every dollar we can. And we're able to do that more when we have more dollars. So a dollar of restoration funding helps a dollar of replenishment funding go further, and vice versa. And again, a lot of this I know there's concerns with the limited shell resources. Wherever possible in these sanctuary areas, we're going to be using mostly alternative substrate. And again, we can address this more at the next meeting, but wherever possible and in practical, some of that alternative substrate can be used in harvest areas as well. And I wanted to touch on something that we were able to do last year that really helped sort of bring the price down per bushel that we pay for shell, which usually doesn't happen these days. We were able to use some of the fine shell in a restoration area that was funded with that DEQ money. And normally we get a very small credit back from the shell dredging company for that fine shell. But we were able to use some of that restoration funding to pay for that fine shell, and that lowered sort of the pure unit cost of what we paid for the shell that went on harvest areas, so the full-size shell. So that's just one example of how these projects can sort of help stretch the funding further, sort of to tangential projects, and really help things out. Again, we'll probably have about that same level of funding from the Nature Conservancy this year again. And again, last year they actually funded some work on harvest areas as well. So over there on the seaside, they did fund a couple acres with their funding from last year of both sanctuary and harvest areas as well. So it's likely that effort will continue this year, as well as some bayside restoration work. And then this non-general funding is mostly the user fee money. We also, with some of the federal grant money, we have some indirect cost recovery that we can put back into shell planting projects, either on public harvest areas or on sanctuary areas. So taking these grants means more work for our staff, but we do recover a little bit of funds from those grant projects to help support the program, and translates to more shells in both harvest areas and sanctuary areas. So again, I just want to emphasize that I know it's a lot of money for a lot of different projects, but the economy of scale really does work to stretch those dollars in further directions there. So that's sort of what we're looking at about for 2021 funding for this coming replenishment season. And I'll stop there again if there's any questions on that.
Andrew, JC.
Yeah, go ahead there.
Well, could you explain the NOAA grant, the 500,000 to 1.6 million? What does that entail?
That's specifically, again, for that large-scale restoration. That's the focus of the Chesapeake Bay program goals. So that's primarily going to go towards work in the Piankatank River. And again, that capital funding is likely going to go towards sort of finishing those sort of restoration targets in the Piankatank River, the Great Wacomico River, and then likely the York River are sort of the three tributaries that are targeted for large-scale restoration. The areas that have been selected, I can send out more information on those, but they're separate from our current harvest areas. So we're fortunate in Virginia that we haven't had quite the level of feeling of one side taking from the other in terms of actual ground. So we've been trying to do our best to make sure that instead of sanctuary areas being imposed on top of existing harvest areas, they're sort of done adjacent to them, in the hopes that they both sort of help each other out in terms of spat flow back and forth. And again, the main thing being that whenever possible, if there's a barge load of material going for a restoration project, and we put some on for replenishment on the harvest area, that barge is cheaper for both of those areas. So wherever possible, we'll try to do that as well.
Okay, I got you. Yeah. So that money, is that included in the restoration funding, or is that added to the 1.5 million on the restoration side?
That's additional too. So each one of these is separate. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Right.
the general funds are state funds. and everything else, that capital fund is sort of a separate pot of money, not from general funds. It's separate from those state general funds, but it is state funding. Then everything else is either federal or user fees or private organizations there. So it's not the taxpayer that's on the hook for the Virginia taxpayer anyway. On the federal side, it's federal tax money, and then on the Nature Conservancy side, that's private individuals.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I understand that. Now I see it, where if we bring the restoration funding up about on par with the replenishment side, right?
That's right. Well, in terms of state funding, the replenishment side is actually higher than the restoration side for that general fund.
Yeah.
That capital fund is a little bit of a different animal there, but and that's going to be mostly focused on that restoration, the non-harvest stuff. But again, wherever possible, we can use some of that funding to sort of support joint goals, but most of it's going to be focused in terms of substrate additions on those sanctuary areas targeted under the BAIT program.
Okay, thanks.
Andrew?
Yeah, go ahead there.
I was wondering, you keep saying, and I get what you're saying, that with each barge load, with all the money, it makes each barge load cheaper. But just before you said all that, it was you had voiced or brought up the concern of the amount of shells into restoration. I mean, does this make good sense to put all this money into these restoration if it's taken from the replenishment shells? And it isn't. I don't know if I'm being clear, but I understand the barge load's cheaper, but if we're using shells that are going to eventually just, I mean, in my opinion, probably much of nothing. Is it right in the end?
No, I absolutely understand that concern, Dan, and I think maybe I wasn't quite clear on exactly on what the case is. But in most of these areas, except sort of already established sanctuary areas where we put a little bit of that whole shell, most of the sanctuary construction is going to be done with alternative substrates, so
Okay. Rocks
and gravel. There might be a few areas where it just makes sense from an economics perspective that if we can get a little bit more shell on a harvest area and a little bit of shell on one of these sanctuary areas where we might split it up that way. And then that fine shell that doesn't get planted because it's sort of basically those cinders on harvest areas, we can use that on these restoration projects, and that helps bring down the cost of the big shells that we put on these harvest areas. And otherwise, that material just goes either right back in the dredge cut, or we get a little bit of credit, and they sell overseas for high-end pigeon feed or whatever else it is to do with it. So that's sort of what I mean by that, and we try to keep those shells that are ideal for harvest areas sort of down to a minimum in terms of what goes on these sanctuary areas, unless it's an area that we've shelled before just to sort of maintain. But the vast majority of the big shells goes on harvest areas, and the vast majority of the alternative substrate fine shells has been going on those sanctuary areas, just for those exact reasons. That a lot of these harvest areas you can't plant with the alternative substrate, and we don't want to run out of shell. So I think we're on the same page on that one.
All right, thank you.
Is there anything else before I move on to the next slide on this one?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, so this is the classic slide that we've all been looking at for I don't know, 20 years now. Not me, but probably some of you. And again, it's as a caveat here. I think that there has been some issues with harvest reporting. Really, a combination of initially the move to Fort Monroe. I think there was some frustration on all sides of things in terms of the paper reporting going to the old address and not getting forwarded, and the back and forth. And then COVID happening in the middle of that last year, that sort of the last year and a half, 2 years of harvest reporting data aren't great. There's a lot more instances, I think, where we've seen, no activity, and maybe there was no activity or maybe there wasn't. But anyway, it's just it's hard to say. So there's going to be a little bit of an asterisk probably for both of these years, and COVID definitely probably had some impact on the demand and the amount that was harvested. But again, with online reporting, hopefully we'll have more accurate information. But even with that, the actual harvest numbers that we saw for the 1920 season did decline a little bit. I did break this out by calendar month in terms of public ground, and I don't have a slide for that, but really sort of for the months of November, December, and January of the last harvest season, we were really sort of right on level with where we typically are in terms of the amount of oysters off public ground that were coming in. So that was good to see that when there was sort of peak demand and peak need for those public ground oysters, they were still coming in at about the same levels we've seen for a long time. Are there any questions on this slide before I move on?
Andrew?
Yeah, go ahead there, Tommy.
Going forward, obviously this year the harvest data is going to be greatly skewed by the market conditions. Will there be a way to impute that or make notes going forward that this graph would not indicate that we had a crash in the resource, but that the market conditions weren't there for the oysters to be harvested? How would we capture that input?
Well, I can. I think just an asterisk in a note, if anyone uses this, should be included on there. And I didn't put that on there yet, and I think we'll probably have more information to include in that. But I do have another slide that here shortly that'll sort of address exactly that question there. That I always think is important to sort of show in comparison with this. But no, that's a good point that. This isn't a fishery issue. This is more of a market demand issue, for sure.
Thanks.
Was there any other questions on this one? Okay. Again, this is just that breakdown that I've started putting together of that breakdown of harvest by public harvest, sort of wild traditional harvest from private ground, and containerized aquaculture or hatchery-based harvest. So again, you can kind of see that they really do all track up and down together for the most part. You do see a little bit of divergence, but generally, if conditions and market conditions are favorable for aquaculture oysters, they're favorable for traditional harvest and vice versa for the public ground there, and they really have pretty closely for a number of years now all gone up and down together. And you can kind of see in this graph maybe sort of the beginnings of maybe some of that higher demand for larger oysters. But again, it's hard to say exactly what's going on. But again, the emphasis is whether it's grown in a cage, grown loose on the bottom, or grown on public ground, that what's good for one is usually good for the other, and that's water quality and fat sets and market conditions. Were there any questions on this one before I moved on?
Andrew, JC, do you have the individual breakdown in the various areas, James River, York River, Rappahannock?
In terms of actual harvest amounts?
Yes,
I don't have a slide prepared for that, but I can pull that out fairly well. I can tell you that I've looked at that number before, and it depends on exactly the time of year, but if you look at it on the whole year, the James River has been and is historically where more of these oysters came from, both off public and private ground, just by the nature of the size of the area, the number of people working there. And then depending on the rotation, it can vary a little bit, whether it's the York or the Mobjack. But the Rappahannock, in terms of public ground production is sort of the next largest area there in
Okay.
most years.
Yeah, I was just, I knew last year everything was probably pretty much the same, but I'm looking to this year, and I think James Woodland is going to be down quite a bit from what I hear. I don't know what y'all are seeing down there, but we'll have to see how the numbers come out.
Yeah, is there anyone else that wanted to touch on what JC was saying there? Yeah, no, I think it will be interesting to sort of see where that effort did shift this year, and I think most of us know where it shifted, and that was mostly the Upper Rappahannock.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
again, that was a matter of that's where the cream of the crop really supposedly was this year, and I guess it's when things are tight, it's hard to not go for the best, I guess, but. I think it's one of those things that hopefully market conditions will come back enough and that we'll have a more diverse and spread out fishery like we initially intended if things weren't what they were. But anyway, is there anything else on that before we move on to the next one? Then?
No, I'm fine. Thanks.
So again, this is what I was touching on there, Tommy, in terms of the actual condition of the resource sort of over that same harvest period. And what you're looking at in this graph here is all the areas that we survey on our annual joint Pat Tong survey with VIMS combined going back to 2003. And I wanted to note a couple of things here is again, this is that same time period where we've seen oyster harvest go up. And again, the total number of oysters based on this last year's survey in terms of small and market numbers is the highest it's been in this time period, even with that harvest sort of either staying stable or going up. And something that again is noteworthy is that brown shell volume that we'll get into later has been staying relatively stable, but it's also with the increased replenishment that we've been able to do, sort of been ticking closer to that 10 liters of material on the bottom, which is really where we want it to be. So it's I guess reason to be optimistic, but it's still also it looks good, but we're still not really to a point where harvest pressure is no longer an issue. It can go back the other way if we stop planting 500,000 bushels of shell, or certain areas we do get down below that 5 liter or 10 liter threshold pretty quick. So this is everything all grouped together, just to sort of give you an overview of the whole area. And again, usually what we do in terms of replenishment, I'll just touch on it here because I wanted to sort of focus mostly on some of the other issues on the agenda and spend more time on this in terms of where all these shells are going at the next meeting. But sort of a broad outline of what we typically do is based on this survey, we try to target the areas that are getting close to that 5 liter brown shell volume threshold, and then also try to target the areas that were just opened in the harvest rotations. Area 6, the Rappahannock, and parts of the York River there, and Great Wacomico, and the parts of Tangier and Pocomoke Sound that were open, and so on. So we try to target those areas for shell planting, along with the areas that are sort of that are the most in need. So that's sort of generally where we go. And based on sort of where we were last year in a similar budget, we're probably going to be again in that range of about, being able to replenish about 700 acres or so this year, which is about what we did last year, maybe a little bit more, 700, 800 acres. So about 700,000 bushels of shell is what we'd be looking to put overboard on harvest areas this year. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead here. Again, just to give folks an idea of how we're doing in the sanctuary areas. again, you can see that these really track in a similar way to all areas combined, and our harvest areas there, excuse me. And again, it's one of those things that because these areas tend to track together and our sanctuaries are sort of spread out throughout our growing waters, it's a good sort of check to know that we're doing a reasonably good job of managing this fishery in terms of our replenishment effort and our harvest effort there. And I just wanted to note that these sanctuaries do get, in terms of these areas, not the same replenishment level. So more bushels of shell each year go into the harvest areas, but because of that, they're maintained at levels of market oysters and brown shell volume that are as close to or higher in some cases than some of the non-harvest areas without those inputs. So it's a good measure that our balance between harvest and replenishment is sustainable where it is, as long as we keep both at the same level, that they're doing about as well as areas that aren't legally fished. So are there any questions on those two before I move on?
Yeah, Andrew.
Go ahead.
Question. Yeah. On these sanctuary areas, you don't see a larger amount of market-sized oysters.
It's sort of on a by area, bay-wide basis. Not usually. I mean, there are still issues with mortality there, and you do see in some areas, sort of sanctuary versus harvest area, more of those large numbers. So I can break these down a little bit more, but if you look at the scale there, you're sort of seeing right over close to 6.5 markets per square meter in harvest areas, and then on sanctuary areas, it's on a whole a little bit higher than that most years. So it's noticeable but not substantial in terms of the number of market oysters. But again, most of these areas don't have that replenishment input. But again, it is one of those things that there still is an issue with longevity in oysters, living past that 3, 4, 5 year time frame, even on sanctuaries, even if they're not open to harvest. But in terms of disease pressure, I actually just had a conversation with Ryan Carnegie of VIMS there just this morning on this topic, and the disease that he's seeing, that he just completed his review of our oysters that were collected during the fall survey, is the lowest he's seen ever. So for probably a number of reasons, we're hopeful that based on harvest areas and more areas, at least oyster disease isn't the same issue that it was 15, 20 years ago, when it really was a huge concern. So again, it's one of those things that year by year you do see it go up and down. And this is, again, a grab of the whole area there.
Andrew?
Yeah, Tommy.
Do you think it would be a fair statement when you, looking back at the number of markets, it stays fairly consistent that theft has not been a major issue? Am I right to assume that if we were having poaching issues, that we would, in a particular year, we would see a massive drop of market size oysters the following year?
You would, but probably not noticeably on a bay-wide scale. So we do occasionally see that on a smaller scale by area, where there are some issues where we're not sure there should be more oysters than there are. The area wasn't open to harvest and they're not there. But on these sort of bigger numbers, you don't see that on sort of the bay-wide scale. But you do see it in some areas, some years, when you're looking at it on a reef by reef basis, or sometimes a larger area than that. So if you group it all together, everything has been sort of gradually trending up. But on an individual basis, there are some areas where that could be a concern.
Thanks.
And again, it's one of those that it's not necessarily a bay-wide, but there are sort of area by area, year by year, we do sometimes see those anomalies. And it's hard to say definitively one way or another whether it's illegal harvest activity or something else, but we do take note of that when it does happen. Were there any other questions on that one before I move on? Okay. Again, this is our spat set that we saw in 2020 last year, all areas combined based on that brown shell volume. And I would say that on a whole last year was sort of about average, so not particularly good, not particularly bad, but sort of consistent with, if there was shell there, we got some spat, and some areas did get lots of spat, but it was sort of your standard, more variable year. It wasn't like 2019 where we had that record spat set, which we're now seeing as a record number of small oysters in most areas. But it was about average. There were some notable areas there up there by Fox's Island in the upper portion of the Virginia portion of Tangier Sound. We saw some of the highest spat sets we've ever seen. So that was good to note. Again, most areas got pretty sort of standard spat sets. I think the Great Wacomico had a lot of recruitment. Some of that was, I would say, evenly distributed on all the shell on the bottom, but from what I've been hearing, there's some areas that did get really good spat sets. We are seeing that in some areas on our survey. So again, not phenomenal, but definitely sort of a standard year, and I wouldn't call it low generally. And the good news is a lot of those oysters that we saw as spat 2019 are pretty good sized small oysters at this point. So I'll knock on some wood collectively for everybody here that those should be growing strong and doing well when hopefully we have a resurgent oyster market next season. Again, this is that sort of brown shell volume that I was talking about before that's so important. And again, you can kind of see, even with that those increased mortalities we saw in some areas in 2018, that this has been relatively stable in recent years. We're sort of on a bay-wide level, getting up closer to that 10 liters where we'd really like to be. And just as a reminder, that 10 liters just means a single layer of shell exposed for spat to set on. So it's not a lot, but it's basically enough to capitalize on every spat that would settle. Whereas if you're down below that, some of those would-be oysters are ending up in the mud and not growing out. So that's really sort of the reasoning behind why we want to at least have 5 liters on the bottom, and ideally 10 or more, in terms of you're able to keep that fishery going if you do get consistent recruitment. And again, this is bay-wide, and we can go into the more specifics next meeting on a by area basis. But were there any sort of questions on that before we get into seed, in terms of sort of the general outline of focusing our shell planting this year on areas that were just open to harvest, or the areas most in need, or any concerns or any comments on that aspect of it? Anything that we should do differently that other than what we've been to it, I guess?
Andrew, JC, just comment that having worked Area 7, whatever you're doing in Area 7, you need to keep on doing everywhere else, I tell you, because that was phenomenal, and still looks good. We'll find out the 1st of February, but whatever happened there, if we were part of the reason why it happened. I know Mother Nature certainly has a big course in it there, but it was certainly a good opening. So keep up good work there, and try to do the same in the other areas.
Well, I wish we could take all the credit for that, but I think we can take some of the credit for it. That's one of those put and take areas where we've been able to move some seed to Area 7 and 8 there, that either from higher set areas or that Nansemond River seed has gone there, I guess, 2 years in a row now. And I think we benefited from, I think in 2017, there was a little bit above average spat set up that way. So I want to give the oysters and the Rappahannock credit where credit's due too. But I think it was we were able to help things along a little bit with the rotation and the put and take fishery and that seed movement. It would be maybe not good for the total market if every area looks like that, but certainly good for the resource. But No, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it was unbelievable because it was basically no strike up there, very little bit of butt shells, absolutely no dead ones. I mean, every oyster was just about the right size, in the perfect shape, and they were really shucking good. So it's just a bummer that COVID-19 had to hit and kill our restaurant market, and the price on the oysters were way down. I mean, for that prettiest stuff, it was really sad to see that, but I guess that's the way things go. But another point of contention, Area 1, the strike that we had down in Area 1 when I pat-downed it in November, Andrew, does 2 and 3, are you seeing the strike up there that you did down in Area 1?
It's not quite as good as Area 1, but it has been. I mean, the shell isn't quite there, and the oyster population, after just being worked like that with some of the hand scrape stuff on there, it got ground down a little bit. But we did get 2019. We did get a really good set in most areas that had a lot of shell on them in the Rappahannock, including Area 2 and 3 there. But it's Area 1 in terms of the strike and just the number of oysters of all sizes there. I think is sort of one of those highlights there.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Andrew?
Yeah, go ahead there, Dan.
I've said it before, and I just wanted to, I guess, just to say it again, just to put it out there. I think the state overall has done a good job on planting, on trying to fit the needs that each locality needs. But I also think with the we don't know what's coming for us with the overall revenue that could be down. I mean, we don't know what we're going to be able to get from the state. Hopefully it's the same, maybe more, but we don't know. I think we need to capitalize on planting the areas that work. I think we've I've discussed it before with my object. It's almost to the point, why keep doing it? Nothing of any significance is coming off of it, or it might be coming off of it, but it's not, it's not the way it's supposed to be coming off of it. There's several rocks around here. I just think that we need to make every dollar count, on what we plant. And I'm sure each locality can tell, could tell you on what, this ain't working. We've spent enough money here. We need to move on. And I just wanted to just bring that up again. But overall, thumbs up.
No, I appreciate that, Dan, and I hear you on those concerns and kind of what Tommy touched on there. And it's one of those that there's not always a smoking gun, but maybe you still smell a little bit of gunpowder in some of these areas. And I think when we get into the seed discussion there, I think we should talk about the mob jack at least a little bit, and what the consensus is from this group is, it'll be out there, I'm sure, but this is one of those areas where we have seen on our survey that the oysters that should be there, at least twice now we've gotten really good fat sets, and there should have been a lot of market oysters there, and there weren't. And we were able to check these areas again, and it wasn't something wrong with the survey. So, it's something that whether we move that area, but again, it's one of those right now. This area is scheduled to come on to the rotation this coming fall, and there are some oysters there, and some of them are really good. It's just there's not quite as many as there should be. So,
well, I'm not even saying take it out of the rotation. I'm saying let's quit pouring money into it. The same way with voiced up here with Parker's. If something's not working, quit pouring money into it. Let's pour the money into what's working. I think the money and the resources is so limited that we need to really make it work.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. It's just it's always one of those things that some of these areas are just, in terms of growing oysters, such good areas. It's a shame to let them go for reasons that we can't control there. But when you have a limited amount, it is something that we have to take into account. Are there any other thoughts on that?
Hey, Andrew, this is Wayne. Yeah, I'm in agreement with Dan. If we got big oysters there, then leave it in the rotation and let them catch the big oysters. But we seem to always have problems with a couple of areas, and if we get a good seed strike there again, then I think we should get the seed and put them somewhere that'll benefit everybody instead of a few.
Andrew?
Yeah, go ahead there, Tommy.
You know, I agree with the chairman and also with Dan, and to go a step further, I think we ought to at least throw a consideration out to move what's there to an area that we can protect it, whether it's large or small, because what we find is every season when that's open for market oysters, by the time we get there in the fall, it's gone. So I would even say I'm probably premature in what you want, where you're going with this, but I almost would like the consideration just to move it in the mob jack.
Tommy, are you saying that you want some more discussion on this right now, and you have a motion on it, or do you want to?
I don't want to circumvent Andrew. I'm kind of jumping out of turn in his presentation, but if that's gonna, if he's not planning to talk about it, I would like to discuss it further. But if he's going to get to that later in the presentation, I'll hold my thoughts until then.
I think I was about done sort of with general shell plant in there, and that would count as seed transport. So unless there's anything sort of on the general outline of where we'd like to put some shell this year, we can get into some discussion on seed movements and where it comes from and where it goes, and we could include Mobjack in that discussion if that's agreeable with you, Mr. Chairman.
That's perfectly fine.
All right. I'll go ahead and I don't want to put a stop to sort of the natural transition there, but we can kind of move on to a sort of seed transport, and I'll give you a little bit of overview on that, and maybe some more information in terms of what we've been seeing in some of our surveys might help in that conversation there. So I just wanted to give a quick overview of the Pianka tank, and this is one of those areas where we used to have that seed program there, and I don't think this area is quite ready to do that again. It really had almost no spat set in 2018, and did have a pretty great spat set in 2019, but it just hasn't been growing super well there. So I'd like to hold off on taking any seed out of the Pianka tank this coming year. And maybe discuss more with this group about how we run the seed program there, and whether there should be any changes to that in terms of maybe having a baby seed fishery similar to the James River, or some other aspect. I think that it did work well when it worked well in terms of having people catch it with dredges and putting the 2 bushels of shell back. But when it didn't work well, it seems to have taken a while to recover. So it's something that I think we want to hold off on taking any amount of seed out of there this year, and then kind of open that up for more discussion at a later point in terms of the Pianka tank areas there. And there's been a lot of this restoration work going on in there in terms of the oyster population. So again, it's one of those areas where it's not so much of a concern on a river-wide area, but in terms of actually maintaining these seed areas that have been seed areas in the best way possible. So I just wanted to kind of key that up. But again, I think that might be something that we could discuss during harvest season discussions later in the year in terms of how we want to manage some of these seed areas. With the Great Wacomico, I know that the scale's a little off on these graphs, so it makes it look worse, but the actual number of volume of brown shell in these seed areas in Great Wacomico that we worked, I think would support again, probably about that 5,000 bushels of seed removal. And we'd likely do that with as a department, as opposed to having it go on private ground. Maybe move that to I think Rich isn't on the call right now, but mentioned some areas out in Blackberry and the areas in the Great Wacomico that were just open to harvest. It seemed to have worked pretty well doing that last year, and then come back and since we're going to be planting shell in the Great Wacomico area anyway, in the harvest areas this year, likely come back and put some of that shell on the areas that we removed seed from. So probably about that 5,000 bushel range there. And then we'll probably get more into James River seed again, but I don't think it's in terms of using user fee and limited funds to the maximum effect. I don't think that the state of Virginia anyway would be interested potentially, unless there's a strong opinion to do so from this committee on buying that upriver James River seed. We'd likely be able to move more seed for a lower price and have it be about as good as that upriver seed from those shell plants in the Nansman Ridge. So we'd probably do about that same level again this year, so in that 20,000 bushel range. And that would sort of be the general amounts of seed and where, at least on a staff level, we'd be comfortable taking it from, barring the discussion of the mob jack at this point. But I also wanted to make this committee aware that some of the seed that we moved up into the Nominee, we planted 2 areas last year up there, the Cut and Dean's up there, and we were able to go back and check on those areas this fall with our dredge survey, and the Cut looked fine, everything else looked fine, but we weren't finding what we should be finding in one of those seed plants up there. And I law enforcement is aware of this, and we went up there with the the side scan sonar to look at things and see what we could see. And we didn't see any, again, smoking gun, but you could tell that something happened. The seed wasn't where we left it, and we were right there, watched it where we put it, and it's not there. So again, that's something to sort of be aware of. And most of the other places where we planted seed, everything was as it should be. But that's just something to think about. And this group probably has as much knowledge or ideas of where they'd like the seed to go, since it is cost a lot more to move it, but it is popular for the harvesters who work on it. So I just want to sort of put that out there as further background before we open it up to discussion there. But that's really sort of where I have information-wise on that, and wanted to get input from this group on where to put about 25,000 bushels of seed on harvest areas, and open it up from there, and we can talk more about the mob jack as well.
Is this open now?
Yep, go ahead, Dan.
I was one of the ones that was very speculative of putting the seed up into Potomac tributaries, and I was just wondering, I mean, how I know I just heard you say it about, the Nominee, but is that been harvested yet? Has that been open since you planted, the seed? Like, wasn't this supposed to be the first year, or is it next year?
The cone was open this year, and that did hold, I don't know, not for the whole 3 months, but there were about 30 boats who worked pretty solid there for about close to 3 weeks. Does that sound about right, Wayne?
That sounds about right. Even last day of December, it was 4 or 5 boats there working.
Okay. And so that area did hold a lot of boats early in 4 or 5 pretty much through December there. So it kept some boats from other areas for sure, and put some oysters on the market. Again, I haven't gone through all the harvest numbers to see what was reported off those areas yet. I don't think they'd be all the way up to date at this point, but when it stays put, it does really well. And it grows a great product up there. And again, it's about that 20 or so boats who stay there as opposed to going somewhere else.
Okay, thank you.
The 3 on Potomac, one's right, the buildings out of the others at one of the outside of is kind of own little place with no eyes on it.
I think you're breaking up a little bit there. If that's Wayne talking.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's a little better there.
Yeah, I was saying that, the three tributaries on the Potomac, there's two of them, the Cone and Yokomico, that Bivens and Coward operate out of, and they can keep a pretty close eye on things. But the Nominee is kind of a bare, quiet place that it really nobody sees what goes on.
Again, this might be a discussion to have later in the harvest season, but I might just propose based on that to focus on that planting just in the Cone and the Comico, and then go ahead and open up that the Nominee area to harvest this year early in the rotation. It does look like a lot of those oysters did grow really well, so there should be with just a year break if they're still there. Go ahead and get them when we can. So that's just a thought right there. But I think that planting the Yacomico with some of that seed did work out well and did hold some boats from what we've seen. And again, I can try to pull the harvest numbers that we have from that area if that would help at the next seed point.
Yeah, it's beneficial.
Andrew, Jason.
Yeah, go ahead there.
If we take the seed up into James with the small scale waterman, would that be something that they would be able to participate in, or is it economically feasible to do it on the larger barges?
It's in terms of the seed that we move, we usually or we have been moving it, not the hand tong seed from hand tong areas, but from that shell plant, and it's a matter of economics, and also it can be difficult to manage 40 contracts and 40 boats versus one boat. So in the past, even when we've moved up River Seed, we usually put out 2 or 3 contracts. We usually get 1 or 2 responses, and then they're sort of managing the boats and buying directly from the harvesters and not the state. I mean, we have a lot to do with, like I said, 1 office person here and 4 field people, if you count myself. So it's a little bit of both, I guess. But probably the preference would be to either put out a contract for someone to buy from small harvesters and then transport it, which would likely cost more, or to put out a contract for just the transport.
I got you. Yeah, I can understand that. I'm just thinking about what we used to do in the Yankee tank. To move some of that stuff there. Maybe if we do something in the mob jag, maybe the waterman will be able to participate in something like that.
Yeah. No, I think it's something we could look at in terms of how we put that out, in terms of at least a minimum size of load that they have to carry. We wouldn't want to be trying to tub out 20 bushels at a time, but if it's in the 200 to 500 bushel range, I think that might be manageable in terms of that. But again, it's we want to try to get the most that we can pay for, and we only have to be completely frank, a limited time window to move this seed before we have to start focusing on the shell planting portion of the year. So we don't want to be still trying to mess with 20, 30 bushels at a time and be missing a spat set because we don't have the staff to supervise the shell plant going on. So it's a tricky one, but I understand the desire to sort of spread that out, not have just one person doing it kind of thing. So we usually try to put it out for at least 3 people. And if folks want to transport it at a certain amount and buy it from individual boats, that's fine. But it's sort of one of those, again, you might go from moving bushels at $6 to $10, and then you get less bushels to the end product where you're getting paid again to catch them. So it's sort of usually the more people involved, the more it costs on the front end for less reward on the back end. But again, it's if the committee has a strong recommendation that they'd like to see that more split up for less seed movement, you know, I think that's something we take into consideration. And we can possibly do a hybrid as well too, sort of by area. But again, we want to try to get most of the seed done that we're going to do in you know, March, April timeframe at the latest.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead there, Wayne.
With what Dan said earlier, you know, we do the best ability and get them in.
I think you're breaking up there again a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was agreeing with what Dan said earlier that, you know, we should have limited funds and we should try to get the most out of them that we can. I mean, $6, $10 any day.
That's usually
Going back to the mob jack.
Go ahead, Tom.
Going back to the mob jack, would it be unreasonable to consider moving the markets and the seed and the shell in a volume manner like you do Nansemond Ridge and getting that to some of these other tributaries where we'd have a better chance at a return on it?
I think you were breaking up there a little bit. Could you repeat that again, Tommy? If anyone's got their telephones unmuted, it would help if you could mute those again.
I was asking, is it unreasonable to consider moving the resource out of the mob jack markets, shell and seed in volume like you do Nansemond Ridge and get that to some of these other tributaries where we could see a better return on it?
Well, I mean, we could set a price point for doing that. You know, I think that we could probably get someone to do it in that $5 or $6 range. I'm guessing maybe a little bit lower. We could try to put that out there and see if that were to bite. But again, you know, I would throw it out there as a suggestion that might be that could be moved to some of the areas in the York River in terms of keeping the cost down. That's a relatively short run, and you know, some of those hand-tong areas that have held at this point 20 to 30 boats a lot of days and they're still going strong right now, might be an area where we could get, you know, maybe some of that on the scrape area and a load or two in the hand-tong areas might be feasible, especially in those shallow areas that are hard to plant with larger barges. And that might be a way that if we planted some of that on the lower area in the York, we could put that back in the rotation a little bit sooner instead of having the mob jack, or have them both open concurrently next year. So that's an idea. And if I think we could entertain that in terms of I'm writing all this stuff down, and I can kind of put a proposal together. And, we don't have to have any votes sort of quickly on this stuff, but I can incorporate some of these ideas into that replenishment plan that we can talk about in a couple weeks. But I can incorporate basically moving the mob jack, everything to another area, and I would propose Timberneck and Aberdeen as the two areas.
You know, if you get in and and it's more there than what you would want to put in those areas, I would also consider maybe coming up the bay with it, and it would give Nansemond Ridge a little bit of a break. And I just feel strongly this has got to be the sixth time that we've had this conversation on the Mob Jack, and we get geared up for season opening in rotation, and it lasts 4 or 5 days every time. And I think probably what's happening there is not only the market's leaving, I think the shell and the seed and everything there is leaving. And I just, going back to Dan's point, we've got a limited amount of resource to work with, and the longer that this resource stays there, the less of it that's gonna be there.
Are there any other thoughts from the committee on that?
I agree. This has been a long time that we've been, in this area that we've been waiting for for the markets. I said it in the last meeting, and I'll just repeat it again. I remember Jim shut it down, closed it for a year because it was a record-setting strike, and it was the most he'd ever seen. And this committee could eat what come off of it. It don't seem to matter. It don't matter what's on it. So I'm in agreement with Tommy. Let's get the resource before it's all gone. Move it somewhere where it needs it, and instead of pouring additional money into it, the money we put into it, let's make it count.
I gotcha. Just real quick, I'm just realizing I got a couple texts from Don there. Jamie, if you're on there, can you try to see if you can get him unmuted? I think he's a call-in number.
Hey, Andrew.
Oh, there we go.
Good God, same time. I've been sitting here since I didn't get here until about 3:45. But anyway, I've been listening. I agree with Dan and Tommy on that too.
Okay. No, I'm thinking. Go ahead. There, someone else is talking. Okay. I think I'm kind of. It sounds like there's some building consensus in terms of. Hold on a second there. Sorry about that. Had the cleaning folks. I actually came into the office today to ensure good connectivity there, but it sounds like there's some building consensus to basically look at moving as much as we can out of the Mob Jack for a reasonable price. See if we can get 20,000 bushels out of there. I'd have to look at the numbers and see if that would be a possibility, and try to move that to some of these areas, these harvest areas that could be made more productive there. So I think I can write something up that would incorporate that idea, if that would be agreeable. And unless there's a clear motion at this point, we could take that up at the next meeting.
Andrew, Ben Johnson.
Yeah, go ahead there, Ben.
I'm missing the point is why the prices are concerned coming out of Mob Jack versus coming out of James River and Nansemond Ridge. You're more centrally located anywhere in the bay there from Mob Jack than you are all the way to the lower end out of Nansemond. And it seems to me if it's a feasible opportunity from there, cost-wise, it should be even more feasible cost-wise to come out of Mob Jack with it.
No, that's I agree with you on that. I wouldn't see why it would be more expensive to come from there. It's just a matter if we could get everything out of there. And I think that given the areas that we transport it to and difference there, that would be the only concern.
In my opinion on that is what you're taking out of Nansman Ridge is a harvest area, just the same as it would be in Mobjack, but obviously the issue in the lower James River doesn't exist that apparently exists in Mobjack. So if you can give one a chance to stay home and hopefully make it to market, it makes more sense to do it in Nansman Ridge than it does do in Mobjack.
No, I think on the price point for sure there. Again, these areas there on the Nansman Ridge are areas that we've sort of done that 20, 30 acres of focused shell planting there. So I mean, Nansman Ridge well, it's a huge area. So this seed is just coming off a really sort of small area there on Nansman Ridge.
No, I agreed, but at the same time, it could grow to be a resource in that end of the river as well as being transported elsewhere.
Yeah. No, I agree with you there. I guess the other aspect for Nansman Ridge that in terms of that area is we can plant fossil shell there for a lower price than we can
That's right.
pretty much anywhere. So that's the other aspect. But someone might be on off mute there, I think.
Not me.
Okay. But yeah, no, I agree with you in terms of price wise. And if we can get close to that 20,000 bushels from there, it would be beneficial to have that area rest for a little bit on Nansman Ridge and probably come back with some shell both on the seed area that we've been working on and the whole ridge this year.
Andrew, JC.
Yeah, go ahead there, JC.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement with everybody else on this Mobjack deal. If we can come up with a good number, which you think we can get off of it, then I think that will determine maybe where we can put it, which way we go, north or south, and we'll go from that. But I think it's like Diane said, I think it's pretty much the best way to go, best bang for the buck. So. We haven't had much success. We've had maybe one decent opening in the last 15 years down there. So state's not getting much out of it, and the Waterman's not getting much out of it. So we'll go from that and then see how it turns out.
Sounds like we can try to take a few lemons and at least get a glass of lemonade out of it, maybe. So,
right. Okay.
Really, that was mostly in terms of the seed that I had to talk about there. I mean, in terms of where we plant it, again, it would probably be regardless of where it came from. I would like to get some back up into Area 7 again this year in the Rappahannock. And again, I think the Cone River has been an area that's done well, and we could look at replanting those areas, and there are some other areas that we can look at in terms of getting the rotation going and leaving the nominee out of it. In terms of there are a lot of good little pieces of bottom in the cone and Ucomico that we could readdress our rotation and maybe if the consensus is to sort of let the nominee go for now and focus on those areas, I think we could work something out there. And then I know it got shot down last year there in terms of area 9 and 10 in the Pocomoke, but those areas really would be at least maybe get a load up in one of those areas furthest from the line this year. Just because it's such good bottom and it's so shallow there, it would be a great area to have a little hand tong rock. And again, maybe kind of split it up and plant an area there, one of the dredge areas with a little bit, and try it up there and see if it stays put. And just because from what I've been hearing, there have been a couple boats that have gone out 9 and 10 and just working some little lumps here and there. They've been, putting 14 bushels on the boat. So there might be something to look at. But I'll let others talk on that. There is that Beverly there?
I haven't said a thing, Andrew.
Okay, I thought I heard you there, but is there anyone else, Don or Dan, in terms of weighing in on seed in the Pocomoke area?
Well, you got Beasley's there, Andrew, and that's the safest spot. That's right off the creek there. VMRC can keep an eye on it. I've never seen a Merlander that far in there, but that would be a good place to put some seed. And the thing of it is, if you can just put 9 and 10 into a rotation, that would be a great thing. I'm anxious to see what the Shells did, see if we got any spats out on them next month. But Beasley's would be a good place to put it. And if that's what you decide to do, I can help you, put some flags, buoys, or something there on a good spot. That's up to you.
I'm with Don on that. I raised that concern last time. There's not, to me, there's not a whole lot of need to keep putting money into a place if it's not in a rotation. If it's not going to be in a rotation, every couple years, whatever it is, why keep doing it? But if you put it into a rotation, I'm for it. I think Don's right. I think I know where he's talking about. Beasley's is. It's just above the beacon there. Yeah. I would put it in a safe, as safest place as possible. I wouldn't go skirting around with it up to the line. I think that'd be just another case of probably throwing money overboard. I think the Maryland side's got strike this year, from what I understand. There's not a whole lot of big oysters on the Maryland side of Pocomoke, but it is got some strike. So that means it's going to get worked more here in the future. That could be that many more that could get gobbled up if you put it to the line. I think when you go up that way, I would stress that it needs to be under. I don't want to say gallons, but I think it needs to go under. I think there needs to be some conversation on where it goes. I'm that strong, that's the way I feel about it. I feel that strong about it, that it's no need to put it to the line. And I certainly, I wouldn't mind. I think I heard Jeff say it was the same seed, to sprinkle a little bit more back on Shell Rock. It certainly done good enough this time. And then I think he said it was the same seed that was over to the Wicomico. I mean, it looked exactly the same when I worked. It Shell Rock looked like looked like Great Wicomico. Sprinkle those places back again, because they got worked. I'm not saying do it heavy, but if you can kiss it, so to speak, just to put a little bit on it.
I agree with Dan, Andrew. We got some places under in Shell Rock that could use some more stuff too. I think there's some places over there to Birds Rock that could use some places, but you don't want to do it this year because that's going to be open up next year. But anyway, whatever you want to do, I mean, I'll help you any way I can.
Okay. No, I think we'd probably like to put a little shell on the spots that got worked the hardest this year over there. But again, that was one of those things that if we can sprinkle a little bit of seed in there too, that would be good. But just try to get that balance right with getting the most out of it. But I think I know what you're talking about there in terms of Beasley. That's the place right there closest to land. You can see it from the parking lot, basically. So on the Maryland side. So tuck it up in there close, and it ought to be. You'd have to be pretty bold to come all the way over there from the other side. And just I know we'll get into it a little bit more next year, but I know we've had all this talk about that Maryland line project there, but it looks like everything funding-wise, permit-wise, we moved all that seed and shell further into Virginia. So I'm really hopeful we'll be able to get that project done. And I know it's not going to actually physically stop someone from coming across the line, but if we actually put up those sanctuary signs there, literally in that thin strip along the lines, it'll be a violation for any Marylander to come across with gear on boards. They wouldn't even have to drop it. I mean, if they crossed the line, law enforcement could write them a ticket just for crossing that sanctuary with dredge gear on board. At least they'd have to go a long ways around with it. So there'd be sort of that added benefit, and it would be a good way of marking the line and paying for it with with some of that restoration funding there. So we could put up, markers like we have on Wreck Shoals, pilings right along the line, and make that area an oyster sanctuary there that would maybe help and at least make it obvious that Marylanders shouldn't go back across and forth there with deer, and also hopefully, help us get the area there 9 and 10 into a rotation like we have in other areas where we have sanctuaries mixed in with our rotation areas. So I'm hopeful to get that actually off the ground this year, and it looks like everything should be in place to do that.
It sounds good. We need the pile in the back, I can tell you that. Merlin is the one that sets the line anyway, and they put a new guy on the boat in the last 2 years. I know people can make mistakes, but those floating buoys are coming more in Virginia than they are in Maryland. So if you got the steel pilings there like we used to have, that's what you need.
Yeah, no, we can get our surveying department and make sure we put a big piling directly on the line. We'll keep it just barely in Virginia. So
that's fine. That's what we had before, and that's what we need now.
No, that sounds good there. Is there anything else in terms of where seed was going? In terms of I think Rappahannock again. Like I said, the maybe York and Aberdeen if there's enough to go around, and look at least one of the Potomac tributaries, and then Beasley Bay there in Upper Pocomoke with a sprinkling on Shell Rock. Is there any other input on the seed on before we move on to other things? And again, I'll try to write this all up so we can kind of take the whole plan next time around and vote it one way or up or down. But I know we got a little rung up around the axle with the seed last year, so I wanted to break it up into 2 meetings and get as much input from y'all as I could.
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right.
Don't too much time.
If it's all right with you, Wayne, I'll go ahead and move on to the next agenda item, which I have down just as the James River seed harvest. So this one there might be some discussion on it, but if that's all right, I'll go ahead and move on to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm sure most folks remember that I guess it was a couple of years ago now we closed the James River seed areas to out-of-state harvest as a result of basically we were seeing on our survey that the number of live oysters and the volume of shell was going noticeably down. So again, just as a quick overview, this is all the James River upper seed areas combined. And again, you can really see in 2018 where everything was going pretty good, and that's really that 17-18 season was when we really saw a lot of harvest come out of there. And then on top of that fresh water coming through in those upper areas did knock out some of the larger oysters there. So we were really kind of going up and down a little bit and really heading in the right direction on that. And we took a pretty good double hit right there from both that fresh water and also all that increased harvest. Let me go to the next slide here. Again, this is that seed harvest by bushels for a calendar year. So you can see in that 2017 calendar year, so that's spring and fall together, more than 150,000 bushels of seed came out of there. I know the quota is set at 120,000 bushels, but that's by season, so that's fall and spring. But that was really when Maryland got their act together and got a lot of money, and literally they harvested every bushel of seed they could get. And then in 2018, it was still pretty high, but that's when we closed down that fishery there to the out-of-state harvest. And then in 2018, it was also when we had that fresh water. So you can see this is a harvest that's been coming out of the James River by calendar year. Again, 2021 data isn't great, but just so folks know, there hasn't been much harvest either in-state or out-of-state at all really in the James River this year. I think with the spat sets we had in 2019 and the amount of in-river transport and having all that close to 140,000 bushels stay in the state. There hasn't been the in-state demand for it this year, and I'm not sure there would be again this year. But from what I've heard, there is basically demand in Maryland right now for as much seed as they can get. So that's something to be aware of. And again, this is just the James River upper areas, just the markets and volume of brown shell per meter. And this is all areas combined. And I want to kind of highlight the scale over on the left-hand side. That's liters of shell volume and number of market oysters. And you can really see sort of starting in the 2018 survey data that the number of markets was almost the lowest we'd seen it ever. And then it continued to dip a little bit more after that freshwater event in 2019. So you can really see that those two factors, all that seed coming out of there and that fresh water, really did have a noticeable impact in the number of large market oysters, which is, those leave with the seed too. That's why people are so fond of these areas. And most of this was focused just in that Burwell's Bay area. So this is all the areas combined, but most of this drop that you see in that area is coming from a smaller subsegment of the James River. So Days Point, Point of Shoals, that side of the shipping channel in there. There is a little bit of seed harvest from, the other areas, mulberry and swash and those, but not much. Most of this is coming from those shallow areas there where there's either larger oysters or it's just a shallower rock and easier to get to. And again, you can kind of see that after that spat set that we saw in 2019, these areas as a whole have started to recover. The areas that have some of that focused seed harvest in some areas are doing a little bit better than this. But as a whole, this area is beginning to recover. The focused seed areas are likely have close to recovered or in some areas recovered to the previous levels. But as a whole, this area isn't back to sort of that long-term baseline in terms of the volume of shell, which we can't replenish these areas easily. It's, at low tide, you have almost no water. So it's an area that's really sensitive, hard to replenish, and that's why and it's just an amazing resource that's unique to this area. So we want to be really cautious about this. And just prior to the SMAC meeting this week, I talked to the commissioner about this and sort of explained the situation and said that we're about at the point where we were in terms of the areas where most of the seed comes from to where we were before we started to see that impact from all the out-of-state harvest. So, we've started to recover, but we're not higher than we were before. And there's likely about the same amount of demand as there would be when we started to see this harvest. So I said that you could open it. I didn't say that you should open it. And I sort of wanted to put that decision. And with those recent regulatory changes, that decision is based on this, but it's sort of ultimately up to him. And he did decide that as of now, until there's new information, we are going to leave these areas closed to out-of-state seed harvest, at least through the spring, unless there's more information, if we do another survey or something changes. But based on the information we have now, that's been the commissioner's decision in terms of out-of-state seed harvest. I just wanted to make this group aware of that and see if there's any discussion on that from this group, and I'd be glad to pass that along.
Andrew?
Yeah, go ahead, Tommy.
I know I've been extremely critical of the outer state transport in the past, and most of that was a result of the high numbers that were leaving. But I would be in favor of a small fishery to export, 50, 75,000 bushels. And my main reason is I think the watermen need it badly. Going back to JC's point earlier in the meeting, the harvest in James River is probably at its lowest point it's been since 2005 due to market demands. And I don't think there's going to be a tremendous amount of of demand for in-state seed just because folks weren't able to harvest and sell what they had moved. Last summer was so slow on half shells. So I would like to see us consider some type of fishery, certainly not to the levels we were in 17 or 18, but something that was that we felt safe about to create a demand for those guys to have work down there in the spring.
No, I understand that completely there, and part of the issue is that, I mean, if you could have every harvester completely spread out over the entire Upper James River and spread that 50,000 bushels out over 4 months, you probably wouldn't even notice it, and it would go back up. But part of the issue with the out-of-state seed, and I'm not exactly sure the way to regulate around it, and it's tricky, is that when that happens, the incentive is to get whatever the demand is as quickly as they possibly can. And it's just the way that it works is, I mean, I'm sure everyone knows the way that it works. The folks go to the places, the harvesters go to the places where they can get it the quickest, and they go right back to that same place the next day and just go as hard as they can. And that's when we start seeing those sort of focused impacts on these popular spots. So when it's in-state, it's more spread out, and they're not going right back to that same buoy that they dropped or that same exact spot and just working that down and so quickly, and you don't see it as badly in terms of the actual impact. So that's a concern for the out-of-state, and I'm not sure how to regulate or what we could do on an advisory level or as a commission to sort of alleviate what we've seen when that happens. And I understand that 20 or 50,000 bushels is probably not going to hurt things on a large level, but on an individual reef basis, that's enough to sort of take that spot, and it might not come back for a pretty long time. And that's sort of the catch-22 of it. But I understand the desire, and it would be good for the watermen if they did have something to do, in moving that seed, and particularly this year. So I think we can.
Why couldn't we rotate? Have you set the season at what you think would be comfortable, whether it's 6 weeks or 8 weeks? You know the areas you're concerned with and what we've got, and enroll it that we have 7 or 14 days in one area, 14 in another, 14 in another. Could we do something like that?
I don't want to commit to anything off the cuff. I'd have to discuss that internally in terms of it might take. I don't know if we could do that by emergency regulation or the mechanism for doing that. But I can try to get back with you an answer as soon as we can on what we could do in terms of both enforcement-wise and what we can do with our current framework of how the regulation is, and what kind of changes we need to do to sort of be able to chop it up further by area. But it is something to, regardless of what happens immediately, to look at dividing these seed areas into something other than what they are, in terms of having a rotation where some areas are clean cull only and some areas are seed only, and sort of re-looking at that. But I don't want to commit to anything on the spot on that, Tommy, but I'll make a note to look into and see what we can do in terms of making some sort of adjustment to that, other than just opening and closing it, which is really sort of the only mechanism we have at this point, is opening and closing that area either to all harvest or to out-of-state harvest.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew, JC, yeah, I agree with Tommy. If we can come up with some kind of plan, you take a look at things, and certainly if we can get some watermen to work there doing that would be great. We'll just have to see, if we can spread it out. I think that would be important. It looks like because of the size of the areas. So maybe we can do something like that. You know, just take your time and see what you can come up with, and we'll talk about it at the next meeting.
No, I'm making my list of homework for sure tonight.
Okay.
At this point, was there anything else on James River Seed or thoughts or ideas? We can again kind of rehash some of this next go around. And again, I think just to sort of keep it in the hopper for looking at harvest seasons when we get on later in the year. But is there anything else before we moved on to the final agenda item there?
Good. Don't say anything.
Yeah, go ahead and move on, Andrew.
Okay, all right, we'll move on to the James or the lease renewal guidelines there. So I just wanted to I know we talked about this a couple times. I guess I don't have a slide for this, but you should have a copy of these, and I'll see if I can stop sharing and actually pull up a copy here. Hold on just a minute. Bear with me here. I'll go ahead and pull up a copy if folks don't have them. Okay, are folks seeing on the screen there the lease renewal guidelines? Okay, and if anyone's not on mute, make sure either you have your phone muted or you're muted on the computer there. I'm getting a little bit of echo there. Okay. So just to let folks know that these guidelines were predominantly sort of developed in consultation with the Aquaculture Management Advisory Group. There is some overlap with the Shellfish Management Advisory Group, and there's definitely some overlapping of interest. But AMAC, well, Aquaculture Management Advisory Committee, has been sort of working with staff on these guidelines and revising these guidelines really since sort of the beginning of 2019. So there's been a fair amount of discussion on these. The Aquaculture Management Advisory Committee voted, I believe, technically to not approve these guidelines by a split decision at the last Aquaculture Management Advisory Committee meeting held last year. And these guidelines, as you're seeing them here, and as I passed out, are what's going to be brought before the commission at this Tuesday's commission meeting. And I just wanted to sort of give a brief overview again on what these guidelines are, what the intent is, and there isn't a need for SMAC to vote one way or another on those, but if SMAC decided that they wanted to make a motion, I would definitely be glad to make the commission aware of both the discussion, and Chairman France would, as a commissioner, be able to do that as well on what SMAC's thoughts were on these. I'll stop there for a minute if there's any questions, and then I'll give a overview of what's in these guidelines.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Tommy.
Just curious, is Mr. Stagg on the meeting?
I think he'll be at the commission meeting. I don't know, Andrew. Will he be doing the presentation?
I believe Deputy Commissioner Ellen Bolam will be giving the presentation at the commission meeting, and I'm not sure. I know Ben was going to try to be on this meeting as much as he possibly could. He did have a conflict. I'm not sure if he's on here now.
The reason I ask Andrew and Mr. Chairman in the January 22nd, 2020 meeting, SMAC meeting, I had asked Mr. Stagg if he could go take a recommendation from SMAC back to staff that some of the traditional leaseholders that were on SMAC be invited to attend the AMAC meetings or be able to be in a work group. And I'm just curious if that had happened. I found out about these guidelines, pretty much after they got to AMAC, the final guidelines. And I just, as a major leaseholder and all the other major leaseholders that are on this committee, I just don't feel like that my interest has been properly vetted in this process. I don't understand why SMAC didn't get to look at this at the same level that AMAC did. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would give Andrew time to go through the presentation on these guidelines, but I would like to see SMAC ask for a continuance on this proposal going before the commission until SMAC has an opportunity to go through this and discuss it at the same level that AMAC did.
Are you making a motion?
I would make a motion, but I don't think it's fair to do so until Andrew finishes what he wants to present or has to say. But and before I made a motion, I'd like to hear from others on the committee if they're in agreement or any discussion on that.
Okay, all right, that's understood. Yeah, we can go ahead with Andrew's presentation and have some more discussion amongst the members.
Okay, I'll go ahead and just I don't want to necessarily read this to you line by line, but just as a little bit of background, I know we touched on this before, but there was a code change that basically triggered sort of this guideline renewal. The 28.2.613 of the Code of Virginia was revised, and there was a couple things added to it. It goes through this in this document, but really the crux of what these guidelines are, and keep in mind these are guidelines, is to really define what VMRC staff will be looking at when we look at whether or not a lease is renewed based on how it's being used to propagate shellfish, balanced against what's spelled out in the code. And I've sort of been more of a passive participant at a lot of these AMAC meetings, aware of what's going on, and try to get the word out. And then again, we try to do our best to communicate what's going on with the various advisory committees, but this was a pretty substantial task, and I understand Tommy's concerns, but I think that's my understanding for why it was sort of put off on a separate committee that did have some of the overlap with AMAC, but again, SMAC has a lot of overlapping interests, because if you remember that graph that I showed, the industries really are closely connected, both in harvest levels, but also participants. But anyway, aside from that, this document really seeks to just outline what staff is going to be looking at as a guideline when we're renewing, when a lease is up for renewal there. So the first thing that really folks are going to be looking at is actually how much harvest is coming off a lease. And really this isn't a way of sort of defining what oyster propagation is and what isn't. It's really just sort of establishing in guidelines almost a definition of no use. So really the harvest amounts are set at basically a minimum of 1 bushel of either harvest or shell planting per acre per year. And if you have that and can show that either through mandatory harvest reporting or what's reported on your annual surveys or lease renewals, then that's basically an automatic renewal. So that's really an easy way that both industry and staff can know, okay, I don't have to do anything else on this 10-year renewal. I can say see mandatory reporting. I can say that in the lease renewal document. If I had produced just 1 bushel per acre per year, that's fine if the lease is renewed. If I didn't, and I can show that I planted at least 1 bushel of shell per acre per year, then the lease is renewed. So that's really sort of the crux of it in terms of that use requirement, is it's really just an easy way to quickly renew the majority of leases that are actually being used. And then after that, all the exceptions for lease renewal that currently exist are still included in these documents, whether that's part of a rotational management strategy, whether it's part of a buffer zone, whether it's for aquaculture tourism, ecotourism. There's a pretty good laundry list of everything else that if you don't meet that very low use requirement in terms of a bushel of effort per acre per year, on average, you can do it all in one year, the 10 years, then there's still everything else to look for in these guidelines. And it's not, at least from my opinion, and I think I can speak pretty well for most of the MRC staff, it's not a try to get you in terms of take a lease away. It's just to define, regardless of these guidelines, what staff is going to be looking at and what the commission would consider, just so it's transparent for both current staff, future staff, and members of the industry. So it's really just an attempt to sort of put down on a piece of paper what's going to happen, whether or not this piece of paper exists. And that's sort of the best way that I can try to explain it. And again, that use requirement, I mean, I don't know, at least in terms of what we do on private ground and public ground, and I know it's not a perfect comparison, but 1 bushel of effort per acre per year isn't really very much, in my opinion, regardless of the ground there. But anyway, that's just an easy way of sort of looking at and catching a lease that should be looked at more closely. And then any of these other concerns that are outlined in this document would be looked at. So it's sort of a pre-screening method, sort of a pass-fail, and if you fail, then you get into any of these other additional factors to be considered by the commission on whether or not to renew a lease. And here they are sort of listed there. So if you're not meeting that 1 bushel requirement, there's, husbandry, nursery, seed growing areas, wet storage, restoration efforts, water quality improvements, erosion control, rotation with other leased areas, shellfish aquaculture productivity, activities that requires a permit. So basically, if you have floats above it, a buffer of a productive area, education, ecotourism, an operational plan, you'd actually have to give it that sort of explains what you're doing. Use of the lease for recreational harvest. I mean, basically anything that the advisory committee or staff could think of that would be a legitimate use that involved production and propagation of oysters, which by code you have to do, we included in this document. So that's really what it is, and it also establishes the hearing procedures that if you are denied at a staff level, as is the case with any action by VMRC staff, you can request a hearing before the commission. And it really just puts in writing what would be happening based on these code changes, whether or not this document exists. So I understand the concerns of Tommy and others about a change to a system that's been in place for a long time, but it's more of a minor change and more of a written policy as opposed to just sort of the verbal policy that's going to be in place whether this document exists or not. So that's sort of how I would paraphrase it for this group. And I think Ben said that he's on the line now. If there's any questions for him specifically, he was sort of he and Deputy Commissioner Bolin were more the lead on this, but I'd be glad to try to take any questions from the group if there are any.
Mr. Stagg, I was asking earlier. I just wonder what the staff feedback was when SMAC had asked back in January of 2020 to have more representation at the table on this. What was the result of that?
Yeah, sure, Tommy. Well, I think the general consensus was that that there's some overlap already with SMAC. There's actually some membership overlap with AMAC, I believe, and also that traditionally it's been SMAC has really dealt with the public ground issues more than the private leasing issues. And of course, we didn't have a committee really that dealt specifically with private leases, which is what really the Aquaculture Management Committee was set up to do, was to address more of the leasing system to include the code mandated leasing laws and any regulations that the agency might pass related to that. It got a higher priority, I think, when the laws were changed in the last 2 or 3 years to add a number of new facets to the code, to include changing the 10-year lease renewal law, and authorizing us to charge a fee to review it, but also mandated that we take a much more robust look at how we review these things, and they added some more criteria to the code. Unfortunately, what they added to the code was still not very much in the way of specifics, and we just felt like this guideline document would be a way to put in writing with the industry's assistance and input, something in writing so that it's not all just kind of a mysterious thing that happens here based on some language in the code that, when you boil it down, basically just says you're supposed to attempt to propagate shellfish, and quantifying that is difficult to do. I apologize if we didn't include SMAC more, but I think that was the general thinking. And of course, the AMAC meetings are open to anybody. Anybody could attend and participate as well. But that's the best I can tell you on that front.
Thanks. I just, talking about transparency and robust discussions, I just don't understand why something of this magnitude didn't have its own work group. And my comment on SMAC was just, if you look across SMAC numbers, it's a lot of acreage of lease bottom represented on this committee. Across the bay, on the western shore, up the bay, down the bay, Mr. Green, Mr. Johnson, Donnie Porter. There's a lot of folks that I just would have liked to have seen us been able to have more input and, been a part of a work group. And I had asked earlier, I think before you got on, I would like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that the commission be notified during the meeting that SMAC had asked to be a part of this, and we're not. And I think the commission needs to know that. But again, I'll hold off on that till it's more discussion. But that's the reason I asked the question, Ben, and I appreciate your response on it.
I second that motion.
All right, I have a motion on the floor and a second, and I guess we can have further discussion then.
I'd like to say a few words about.
Yes.
I sat on that committee. I was part of the work group, and when we had our last meeting, we made it clear pretty much there were several members of that committee, not every member, but a majority of members who were not ready for this to go forward, and had a lot of concerns about the fact that this would be guidance that would start effective immediately or at some point during the year and go backwards 10 years. And people may or may not have kept records. And usually when a new guideline is made, there's some sort of provision for letting people know what they're going to be held accountable for in terms of keeping records prior to when the records have to be produced for the past 10 years. I know I'm probably not making any sense, but that was one issue. Another issue was that there was pretty much a consensus that we felt that there should be an aggregate look if you had enough harvest or production, or you had met the guidelines for one of your leases, then that would be part of your total operation, understanding that most people use their leases in combination, in concert, and in a variety of ways for their overall operations, and that you wouldn't have to do this individually, lease by lease, because we all felt that it was too much documentation, particularly in retrospect for areas that we had left for replenishment or used for a buffer or whatever, that we would have to go back and somehow or other document what happened in, 2011 so many times ago. And there was also concern about things like conditional closures and I have a lease that was closed 99 days this year because of rain. The health department wouldn't let us harvest for a full 99 days of the year, and having to document those records. And, it would be a nightmare to pull together all the reasons when you got ready to have your lease renewed. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that, if the committee that I sat on, the AMAC committee, there were things that were said at the last meeting that said we really think we need to, not send this forward yet. It's not ready. I don't know if anybody else would agree with that, Ben, if you would agree with it or not. But I think that there are going to be some people who are speaking at the public hearing that are going to say, I was on the committee and I don't felt I was heard.
Okay, thank you. Your points are well made. Does anybody else has anything to say before we go any further?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Jackie Shannon. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm having some audio issues.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I would actually push back on delaying this any further. As Ben alluded, this is the result of legislation, and this has been kicked around since 2 sessions ago. I feel, and CBF feels, that this ultimately protects the industry. It ensures that there's going to be land available for small growers. It streamlines growth and participation for areas that hasn't had any production in years. And it helps us to meet our restoration goals. It could help the state meet their restoration goals, because we're looking to put in the same type of projects that Andrew is looking to meet his restoration goals. And we've run into walls both in the Lynn Haven and Lafayette River where we've tried to do restoration work in the last many years, where we have leases that, again, haven't been productive in years. Nobody's really doing anything to propagate shellfish. Some of these areas are in condemned waters where restoration projects could lend themselves to, again, helping to grow the industry through ecological improvements. Now, I understand that this does add some layers of reporting. A lot of the individual or the reporting on individual basis, I think, is pretty easy. And the larger companies, like, for example, Tommy, your company, I think you would have the resources to be able to report that thoroughly and efficiently. And, Andrew mentioned also there's a whole laundry list of really loopholes. I don't see this as a threat to anybody who's actually using their lease to losing it. Again, it's not meant to pull the rug out from anyone. I feel like the fee requirements are minimal. The requirements to keep a lease are extremely minimal, especially if the whole point is to propagate shellfish, but I won't get down into that wormhole too much. But I really see this as a positive thing for the industry and to get more oysters in the water. The other thing I just want to drive home is, water quality was one of the things specifically mentioned that should be taken into account. So I'll just leave it at that. I just wanted to get my 2 cents in that I think this should really be pushed forward. I would encourage other members of SMAC to support this and take that message to the commission. And that's all I have to say right now.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Does anybody else have anything to say?
Mr. Chairman, I don't disagree with Jackie's comments on the water quality or propagating shellfish, and I think all of us do our part there, but I just don't understand what the need to have this done so quickly when there are so many leaseholders that don't feel like they've been kept in the loop or completely, that this process has been completely transparent or that their concerns have been vetted. I'm not asking to drag this on forever. I just asked that a proper work group come together it could happen pretty quickly to at least go through this and that other folks be at the table. I just don't get, if there's nothing to be threatened about, I just don't understand why it's got to be done so quickly. So I would still hold my motion I would still like my motion considered that the commission be notified that SMAC asked to be a part of this in a bigger way and was not afforded that opportunity.
Okay, Tommy, thank you. Andrew, or you, or Mr. Stagg, can either one of you answer the question, do we have more than one member of SMAC on AMAC?
Andrew, you can help me because I can't remember everybody's on SMAC.
I think we had, I guess, not more than one member on SMAC. I don't believe so. No, but I guess I would say that there were both large growers, both small growers, and it was sort of understood that SMAC would be made aware of this, and I believe that we did our due diligence to push these meetings out, and I know SMAC was made aware of AMAC's existence, I guess more than a year ago, and that they've been meeting on this regularly, I think. So I don't know if it's fair to say that they weren't involved and weren't aware of it, and I guess, I mean, I understand where everyone's coming from on this, but I want to say that I guess I feel like there's not a lot that could be added to this, and I guess I think that AMAC was everything that anyone wanted from any perspective was basically added to this document. So I'm not sure. I understand where Tommy's coming from and wanting to be more involved, but I'm not sure what else could be added to it to address any actual concerns other than just there's concerns. But anyway, I in terms of your direct question, I think SMAC was made aware of it. There was overlap, and again, these were all public documents, and I believe I passed out these guidelines to SMAC, not in this exact form, but in previous forms before.
And this has been, I just want to clarify a couple things because I don't want to keep beating this dead horse, but a couple things that Beverly said. There is a contingency at the very end of the document that basically says if these are adopted, it would be a measured approach on any lease that comes up for renewal from the date of the adoption through February of 2029. So that would cover every lease that was covered under the law change. So once the law changed, 10 years forward would be 2029 to allow us to consider the fact that you may not have records back, 7, 8, 9 years ago. So that is in the document. We tried to address that. There is a catastrophic events bullet in there. And I understand if it's 8 years ago, you have to have records or remember that something catastrophic happened, but that is a consideration as well. And the committee worked on these for well over a year, about a year and a half, almost 2 years if you count going over the regulation that actually adopted the fee related to the 10-year renewal, which was done first. But this topic was talked about some during that same discussion about the fee. So, I don't really feel like I characterize this as being rushed. There was an attempted vote on this in August at the AMAC meeting, and that was delayed because members said the same thing y'all are saying today. It needed more work and more input. And of course, we held another meeting after that, and it was voted on in September. And the vote was 4-5. Basically, only 4 people voted to move it forward, and 5 voted that they didn't think it should be adopted. So we understand that. And again, I don't want to, just keep talking, but I think that's why we're at the place we're at. And it was delayed again from September because industry asked that it be moved back, mostly because of the busy time of year and that they didn't feel like they could attend the meeting. So, and I understand your committee still may vote in the way you vote, and that's fine. And we'll definitely relay that to the commission. The one thing to keep in mind is if this is not adopted, the commission will continue to review leases under the law, and we will use a lot of what's in this document, I think, as how we do it, because the law doesn't give us a whole lot of specifics. So that's basically all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Stagg. Andrew, I'm going to ask Tommy to repeat his motion again, and after that, if you would call the roll for the vote.
Mr. France, Ben Johnson.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
I don't mean to interrupt you moving forward here, but before we vote on this, I've got 1 or 2 little small points I would like to make. Obviously, staff is in agreement that SMAC was included in the discussion of this document, and that can be debated yay or nay. One thing that I would have to say sticks out in my mind that a lot of the members of SMAC and maybe not too many members of AMAC may have had a different feeling on would be Section 2 under the criteria for renewal propagation criteria, starting on line 82, where it mentions that anyone harvesting with a dredge or a scrape has to replant shell or seed at, I'm not going to go into reading the whole paragraph, but as Mr. Stagg, as we discussed when met with you and Commissioner Bowman, I guess over a year ago now, that from a harvester's point of view there, you're looking at a increase in cost anywhere from 10 to 30% in having to do that. And why that burden's bared just on someone who harvests oysters with a drudge or a scrape, I do not understand. And as well, not even taking into the account that both of those resources, be it shell or seed, are in extremely limited supply. The state struggles to get what they need and gobble up the majority of it. And for the private person, big or small, it's not only a tremendous financial requirement, it's a tremendous logistical requirement. And something like that, I think, with a little more input from people, as Tommy was referring to from the SMAC committee, may have yielded a different result there. And my other concern is, yes, this is something that's been in place and something that's been slowly creeping forward, but the majority of the discussion on this has been done through this virtual platform, which is without a doubt an inadequate forum for discussing anything of any importance. And that's kind of where I stand on it for right now. It's not so important that, in my opinion, in moving it rapidly or moving it forward to the next step, that there is no chance for public comment in a forum like this. It's not the same as it would be if you could stand up at the podium in front of the commission and speak your piece. And it may work great for the commission that it doesn't get drug out 2 hours with public comment, but that's the point of public comment, and public comment needs to be heard in a decision like this. And to rush it forward virtually through this platform, I think, is poor business, for lack of a better way to put it.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Andrew or Mr. Stagg, could you respond to what Mr. Johnson just said about the the dredging or hand or scraping or.
Do you want me to take that one, Ben, or did you want to go for it?
Well, it's your committee. I'll let you take a shot at it. I think you can handle it.
All right. I guess in terms of that, I guess the first thing is there is an exception to that one. There's an exception to just about every exception that in a case where oyster ground can be proven to be productive without shell planting. So if you have got a very productive piece of oyster ground with a great deal of shell base and you're harvesting it very carefully, where that minimum amount of effort, again, for dredging, which is required by code, again, in order to have a dredge permit, that's a separate issue. You're supposed to plant shell and clutch just to get that dredge permit. That's in code. That does require a separate hearing to not give the dredge permit. But this is just sort of clarifying that. But again, if you can't show that level of shell planting, which is either 100 bushels per acre per year or 1 bushel per acre of harvest, whichever is lowest. So again, it's still a reasonably, I think, reasonable amount to be harvesting by dredge to be able to put that amount back. But again, if you can prove based on staff coming out taking a look at your ground that there's actually something there, there's shell and clutch on the bottom, there's oysters there, that area would be renewed. I mean, this is really to get at those leases that are either right against a great piece of private ground that have no shell on them, but oysters keep coming off of them, or the same thing for public ground, a great piece of bottom a piece of bottom that's adjacent to productive ground. And that's sort of a little bit where it is. But again, if it's productive and there's shell there and it takes a trip out in the boat, and that's why that $150 renewal fee is there, no expense to you. We come out, we look at it, you drop a scrape, we know there's something there, that lease is renewed. So again, it's to try to define what's already in code in these guidelines. And then if it still doesn't fit, we go out there, we take a look at it together. If there's shell there and it's productive and you haven't planted anything, you don't have any record, but there's a bunch of shell there, that lease is renewed. So again, we've tried to take every comment from SMAC, AMAC, and folks in the public who have participated and tried to incorporate it into this document. So I hope that addresses some of your concern there, Ben, on that additional shell planting or seed planting requirement for public ground. But again, it's an attempt to be in the best interest of both the public fishery and the private fishery in terms of protecting both resources.
All right, thank you, Andrew. If there aren't any other comments or questions at this time, I'd ask Mr. Kellum to repeat his motion. And if Andrew, you could call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that the commission be notified that SMAC had concerns that were not addressed through the AMAC committee meeting, and that we request this to come back to SMAC before it proceeds forward.
All right, we have a motion, and we did have a second. Who seconded it?
Ed, Beverly,
Okay.
Ledford.
Thank you, Beverly. All right, if you could call the roll, please.
Okay, I'll go with you last there, Mr. France, but I'll start with Jackie Shannon.
Opposed?
Okay. Don Porter.
I'm for it, Andrew.
Okay, is Cody on the line there? I'm not sure if he joined us or not. Cody Metcalf?
I'm for it.
Beverly Ledford?
For it.
Tommy Kellum?
Aye.
Mr. Ben Johnson?
I'm in favor of it.
Mr. Hudgens,
Aye.
Mr. Green,
Aye.
let's see, I don't think Ernie George or Mr. George, are you on the line there? No. And Mr. Harding, I don't believe Richard Harding's on the line either. Okay, Mr. Dice.
Aye, I'm for it.
Mr. Di Maria, I don't think I've heard him. Mr. Di Maria. Okay, and I don't think Mr. Cowart, we haven't heard him. Mr. Cowart. And Chairman France.
Abstain.
All right, I have, I guess the motion passes for forwarding that recommendation to the commission that SMAC feels they haven't had their concerns vetted here and that they'd like it to come back to SMAC before proceeding forward.
All right, thank you, Andrew. And we will convey this message from SMAC to the commission. If that concludes all the business you had on the agenda, Andrew, the only other thing I'd ask, is there any new business?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Keller.
One thing that I would like at some point when conditions are more favorable, I would ask Andrew, he has a staff member that during a restoration project actually saved someone's life during a boating accident. And it's come to my attention a couple of times and been brought up, but when terms are appropriate, Andrew, I would like to see Vernon and his assistants no longer there with your staff, but I would like to see Vernon recognized through the commission for his efforts and his cool-headedness and the fact that someone's alive today for his actions. You guys do a lot of work and you don't always get recognized for your field work, but it could seem petty in some respects, but in others, I think it would be good for your staff to be recognized. And I think it was a very big effort that he made. And again, someone's alive tonight for his actions. And I would like for the commission to know that and would like for it to be on public record.
I think Vernon might get the award for being the most modest person there, Tommy, but he must have been able to keep it pretty quiet, but they already gave him a medal for that. So
all right, well, good. I'm sorry I didn't know that, and you're right. He is extremely modest, and I thank whoever forwarded that on. But so that this committee knows that he's a great asset to your program, and I'm happy that he was awarded that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and just so folks know that I'll give you a little brief rundown on that, and Vernon and one of our other former employees, Vass Dunstan, there were able to pull a person out of the water there in the lower James River after their boat was struck by a barge there. So and able to get him to Leeward Marina there in an open boat performing CPR the whole time. So it really was a heroic effort. That was a couple of years ago now, so the year before last. But no, almost all those shells that we were talking about going overboard, Vernon was on the scene watching every one of them and making sure they were going in the right place. So he really is does a lot in a lot of ways for this program, and I appreciate that, Tommy. Thank you.
Absolutely, there's a tremendous amount of work done in-house with Miss Hogg and what you do and the others. That for the amount of people it's a lot that goes on, and we appreciate what you do.
Yeah, that's well said, Tom, and we really do appreciate the staff and all that they do. And I guess I'll ask, is there any other business anybody has?
This has been, Tommy, I appreciate you bringing that up. I wish you could have been here for the meeting because it was pretty emotional, and they gave him the award, and they explained what had happened, and I appreciate you bringing it up even though it had already been done. And you're right, that's a great bunch of guys, a good staff, so appreciate it a lot.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, I would like to thank all of you for your participation today and your help in the discussions of the business of SMAC. Thank you, Andrew, for all the hard work you did to prepare this. Andrew, is there any other thing you'd like to say before we close?
Just again, I appreciate all the input, and I think I'm with everyone here where I'm looking forward to seeing you all face to face one day, but I've got nothing else, and I'll try to get together an agenda and try to get a date set for an SMAC meeting not too far from now. So I appreciate everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right, thank you, everybody. Be safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you,
you.
Chairman. Be safe, everybody.